Sometimes the places I'm looking for don't look anything like I imagined. When I added the Thomas R. Ayer House to my map, I was expecting to find another crumbling old Florida home slowly disappearing into the woods. Instead, I drove right past it. Twice. The GPS insisted I had arrived, but I kept thinking there's no way that's it. Because instead of an abandoned ruin, I found a beautifully restored Victorian home that looked very much lived in. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just another forgotten place. Someone had cared enough to save it. Now, if the name Ayer sounds familiar, there's a reason. We recently explored the old Spring Hill Ayer Cemetery, where members of one of Florida's pioneer families still rest today. So when I discovered there was still a house standing that carried the same name, I knew I had to see it for myself. Although I wasn't about to go knocking on somebody's front door at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I did what any reasonable history nerd would do. I rolled down my window, drove by really slowly with my camera pointed out the window. You know, house stalking. This may become a trend. But as I drove away, one question kept bouncing around in my head. Who was Thomas R. Ayer? And why does this house still matter nearly a century and a half later? To answer that question, we have to go back to the 1880s. Central Florida looked very different than it does today. Much of this area was still considered frontier country. Pine forests stretched for miles. Scrub oak covered the sandy ridges, and small settlements were scattered around lakes and rivers. Then came the railroads. Suddenly, land that had once seemed isolated became connected to the rest of the country, and people began arriving with enormous dreams. One of those dreamers was Thomas R. Ayer. Like many early Florida pioneers, Ayer saw opportunity where others saw wilderness. The warm climate, sandy soil, and abundant sunshine made this region ideal for growing citrus. And by the mid-1880s, Florida was entering what historians now call the citrus boom. Oranges weren't just fruit. They were becoming Florida's gold. Around 1885, construction began on this remarkable home overlooking the countryside near present-day Oklawaha. This wasn't a simple farmhouse built out of necessity. It was a statement. Designed in the elegant Queen Anne style, the house featured steep roof lines, decorative woodwork, large porches, and the kind of craftsmanship rarely found in rural Florida. It announced something to everyone who saw it. Someone believed this place had a future. Today it remains one of the finest surviving examples of rural Queen Anne architecture in Marion County. But as I dug deeper into its history, I discovered something interesting. The story isn't quite as straightforward as simply Thomas Ayer built the house. Property records show that the land was originally purchased by L.J. and Lucy Parr in 1885. Within a couple of years, ownership transferred to Thomas Ayer, and before long, the property changed hands again. That's why you'll sometimes hear it called both the Ayer House and the Parr House. Instead of belonging to just one family, this home became part of several pioneer stories woven together. It's hard to overstate just how important citrus became to Florida during the late 19th century. Imagine standing on the porch of this house shortly after it was built. Instead of paved roads and modern neighborhoods, you would have looked out across expanding orange groves stretching toward the horizon. Every season promised another harvest. Every tree represented possibility. Communities like Oklawaha grew because families like the Ayers and the Parrs believed this land could provide a better future. Roads were built, businesses opened, workers arrived. Entire towns began taking shape because of citrus. The Thomas R. Ayer House wasn't simply where a family lived. It stood at the center of a community that was growing alongside Florida itself. For a few years, everything seemed possible. Then nature reminded everyone who was truly in charge. The winter of 1894 arrived with temperatures few Floridians had ever experienced. An Arctic blast swept across the peninsula. The first freeze destroyed much of the season's fruit, but many growers believed their trees would survive. As temperatures warmed, fresh green growth appeared. Hope returned. Then February arrived. A second freeze struck. This one was even colder. The new growth froze almost instantly. Sap expanded inside the trunks until the bark split apart. Entire groves that had taken decades to establish died in a matter of days. Imagine standing right here on this porch, looking across acres of orange trees that had represented your future, only to watch nearly all of them die before spring arrived. Across Florida, fortunes disappeared almost overnight. Families abandoned farms, businesses failed, entire communities struggled to recover. The center of Florida's citrus industry slowly shifted farther south, where freezes were less common. For places like Oklawaha, the golden age had ended. And although the Thomas R. Ayer House survived, the world around it would never quite be the same again. If you're enjoying uncovering forgotten stories like this one, I'd love to invite you to become part of the Travel Made Personal family. Every week we explore the places that history almost left behind, from abandoned towns and pioneer cemeteries to overlooked landmarks hiding in plain sight. So if that sounds like your kind of adventure, make sure you're subscribed, ring that notification bell, and come explore with us, because there are still thousands of stories waiting to be rediscovered. One of the things I love most about places like this is that they remind us history isn't always found behind museum ropes. Sometimes it's somebody's home. Over the decades, ownership changed. Florida changed. The citrus economy evolved. Automobiles replaced horses. New generations arrived. Old pioneer families slowly faded into history books. Yet somehow, this house remained. While countless wooden homes from Florida's pioneer era disappeared to fire, storms, neglect, or development, this one survived. Not untouched, not unchanged, but preserved. In 1993, the Thomas R. Ayer House was officially listed on the National Register of Historic Places, recognizing not only its remarkable architecture, but also its connection to Florida's early settlement. Looking at it today, it's easy to admire the porches, the trim, and the beautiful Victorian design. But what I see is something much bigger. I see the optimism of people willing to leave everything behind to build a future. I see families who believed they could create something lasting. I see generations who weathered triumph and heartbreak under this same roof. That's what makes places like this important. Not because they're old, because they remind us that history was lived by ordinary people making extraordinary decisions. I only spent a few minutes here that morning. I never stepped onto the porch. I never walked through the front door. In fact, I intentionally kept my distance because this is someone's private home now, and I wanted to respect that. But those few quiet minutes were enough, because history doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, looking so well cared for that you almost forget how many years it has quietly witnessed. The Thomas R. Ayer House has stood here for nearly 140 years. It has watched Florida grow from a rugged frontier into the state we know today. It survived prosperity. It survived devastating freezes. It survived changing owners, changing generations, and a rapidly changing world. And because someone chose to preserve it, its story can still be told. That's why I keep pulling over for places like this. Not because they're famous, not because they're tourist attractions, but because every old house, every forgotten cemetery, and every quiet roadside stop carries the fingerprints of the people who came before us. As long as we're willing to slow down, listen, and remember, their stories never truly become forgotten. I'll see you next Forgotten Friday.